Welcome to this episode of the No Delusion Zone. I'm DeBatto. My guest today is a return customer. He's been on the No Delusion Zone before, and I was really glad to have him back. Jason Smart. Jason has a PhD in political science. He is an analyst, expert in Russia and international affairs. He has his own website at jasonjsmart.com. He's a senior editor and opinion columnist with the Kyiv Post. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, one of your favorite titles is being persona non grata for life from Russia. So without further ado, welcome back to the No Delusion Zone, Jason.
Thank you so much.
We discussed a little bit off air about what's going on right now in Ukraine, and I'd like to open with that because the biggest story, in my opinion, right now in the world, but certainly in Ukraine, is the incursion. From my knowledge, the first attack inside of Russian territory by what is arguably at this point regular Ukrainian forces, as opposed to militia or Russian forces fighting for Ukraine. So. Could you give us a little insight on that and tell us what the current status is and what exactly is going on, in your opinion?
So at present, the the Ukrainian military has incurred into the Kursk Oblast, which is a southern region of Russia, near Kharkiv, the Ukrainian city that's being attacked daily by Russia. And they've taken about 155 or more square kilometers of territory, which is quite substantial. I mean, to give this a comparison, Russia occupies currently about 150 square kilometers of Kharkiv Oblast of Ukraine. So, in fact, the Ukrainians have made more progress in the first 2 days of invading Russia than the Russians have in the past 2 years of invading Ukraine.
Wow. And is it, do you believe at this point it's official? These are Ukrainian forces. These aren't irregular militia or anyone fighting for Ukraine from Russia or Europe or anything else. They're the Ukrainian military.
Yes, I mean, it is the Ukrainian military. I don't know if that's been officially acknowledged, but yes, it is. It's the Ukrainian military. Previously, there have been units that are made up of foreigners, specifically the Legion of Free Russia, RDK, Siberia Battalion, that did do similar things inside of Russia, but they were much smaller. They're more like raids. This is an actual invasion with the intent of fortifying the positions they take and holding them.
Why now?
I think there's several different things going on. One thing that's going on, of course, is in the Donbass. Recently, it's been quite difficult for the Ukrainians. They've had trouble with getting weapons for months, and now they're also struggling to arm all the units they have. And so they don't have as much manpower as the Russians have. And doing this is going to totally change the calculation for Moscow as to where it needs its soldiers. It's simply not going to be able to allocate the same manpower or resources to Donbass that it has before. But I think that there's also a very good chance that Ukraine realizes this is a very opportune moment to set up the conditions where they can bargain with Russia in the future to return parts of Russia in exchange for parts of Ukraine. At the same time, I think that this is going to serve as a distraction from other things. And we don't know what that could be. I mean, we really don't know. A lot of people suspect that perhaps Crimea will be liberated soon, but we simply don't know. And so that's just speculation. But we can be absolutely certain that this has created absolute chaos and panic in Russia.
Do you believe that Ukraine intends on actually occupying for any length of time any of the area that they have seized thus far?
I think they will, and they can. I mean, it's not that challenging. The fact is that Ukraine, given the fact that it has the weaponry to do so, as the Germans, the head of the Committee on Foreign Relations in the German Parliament said yesterday, that the Ukrainians are free to use those weapons that they've been given by Germany in any way that they wish to, not limited to just territory of Ukraine. So as long as they're able to destroy Russian units before they get closer to them, as they did last night. I mean, Russia sent in a huge column. That column was destroyed. The Russians claimed it was by HIMARS. It's not clear if that's the case, but it was destroyed. And it's estimated that 500 to 1,000 Russian soldiers were wiped out instantaneously. So Russia is sending another column right now, and I suspect that we will see it get wiped out in the next few hours.
Yeah, I've read some really angry messages from Russian military bloggers about that. They want the battalion commanders executed or kicked unconscious. They can't believe that this is happening. The reports range anywhere, like you said, from 500 to 1,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. The entire column wiped out. And yes, HIMARS are being blamed for this, and they're sending more into this zone. Also, what can you tell me about the raid, the drone raid, I believe it was, on the Russian airbase that hit the ammunition dump and seemed to have caused quite a bit of damage?
Well, it was very important because that attack, which was very, very successful, struck a facility, an airbase, that houses a lot of the glide bombs that Russia uses. So those glide bombs, which have gotten a lot of press recently, are used daily against civilian populations in Kharkiv, Ukraine, but also on the front. They're very effective. Unfortunately, it appears that Ukraine was able to destroy a huge supply of them. And by blowing up that warehouse, it's going to be much more challenging for Russia to even attack the Ukrainian units that are currently located inside of Russia.
No, when I read that, and they've been hitting a lot of airfields recently, and they've been hitting a lot of ammunition dumps. And in this current raid, I believe they've taken over an oil transition point or a fuel point where it actually pumps fuel oil into both Ukraine and Europe. And if they go a little further, they could, I guess, seize a Russian nuclear plant as well as some more oil refineries and so forth. So this is quite an incredible development. Do you really believe that the Putin, the Kremlin, is going to be able to react to this other than what they're doing now? Do they have any reserve forces or any forces at all that are going to be able to respond to this in a timely fashion?
No, they don't. Russia has several different classes of people it's going to try to use. One are the ones who are the Kadyrov troops, the Chechens. They've already posted a number of videos where they're quite obviously nowhere near the fight. Where they're shooting at trees or they're shooting at railroad tracks that are empty. And they say that I mean, it's just so obviously staged. It's so clearly, guys don't stand up in a field and start shooting. You stand behind something and start shooting. So why are they doing this? Well, just to make videos and say that they're doing something. But the fact is, according to Kadyrov's people, they barely missed being able to stop the Ukrainians as they skirted by them. But it would appear more likely that Kadyrov's troops fled to avoid actually being in combat. Likewise, the Russians have another group of soldiers they can use, which are the conscripts. So every year, Russia takes in a number of conscripts. Those troops have not been used in the war in Ukraine because the Russian law doesn't allow for them to be used unless there's a declaration of war, which there's not been in Russia yet. And so those conscripts are something that Putin does not want to use up because public sentiment is very much so on their side. Unlike a contracted soldier who's getting paid, and there's a ton of mercenaries also in the Russian military, which people don't feel there's not as much public sentiment that's tight to them as there are for the conscripts who are young guys who are just pulled into the military for their year and a half period. And so they're the ones that are getting blown up right now, it appears. So I think that's going to be bad for public sentiment for Putin.
Well, you're right. I mean, as far as I know, they're stretched way past thin. Which is my follow-up question: do you believe that there's any desire or ability on the part of Putin to institute a massive or a bigger mobilization to get more people into the military so he can deal with this? Or do you think the Russian public still isn't ready for that?
The Russian public isn't ready for that. I mean, earlier today, the Kremlin said that they would not have another mobilization.
Hmm.
But I think that the public sentiment is very much so set against that. We don't, polling in Russia doesn't count for very much, but we can look for secondary things as to what the population feels. And those who are Googling how to join the military, for instance, or Yandexing how to join the military, it's gone down and down and down. When you do ask questions of people like, would you be proud to have your son in the military? The numbers are really low now. So there's a lot of secondary things we can see in sense that within Russia itself, there's not a huge amount of support for this. And it's interesting is that some oligarchs around Putin, namely one yesterday, Deripaska, yesterday said that he thinks that the war should stop and it's wrong, which is shocking. That's really unusual. So I'm not quite sure why he did that. But there's signs within Russia that, yeah, the population's not excited by this. The sanctions are hurting their economy. The Russians are feeling that. They're facing shortages of lots of things, including people. I mean, they have labor shortage. They have a shortage of specifically technical people, IT background people. These are the ones I wanted to get out to avoid, having to join the military if it came to that. So Russia has really set itself back a huge amount through this war, and the average person is cognizant of that fact.
You know, I still have contacts within Russia, and I speak to them frequently, almost on a daily basis. And still to this day, uh, except for the people that, of course, are following the current events and are really aware of what's going on, they're still not affected by this war. I have to bring them information, and I'm just wondering, in your opinion, Jason, are the current events, what's going on right now on the Russian border with Ukraine and the incursion, is any of that getting back to the majority of the Russian people? Because as you know, Putin's got a stranglehold on the media, and most people don't use VPNs in Russia, maybe 20% or so, but the older people don't, the middle-aged people don't. Do you think any of this is getting through to them, that they're actually under attack on Russian soil?
Well, I mean, they do have Telegram channels and stuff, which is a messaging app that a lot of them do use. It's very popular in Russia. I think it is getting back to them. The way it's probably phrased, though, is going to be a little bit differently. I mean, that everything's under control, that this is an atrocity by the Ukrainians. It doesn't express, how bad the situation really is, obviously. At the same time, I think that the population as a whole of Russia isn't really what we should be focused on because it's sort of irrelevant what a grandmother in Novosibirsk thinks because nobody in Russia cares what she thinks. What does matter is what Moscow thinks and St. Petersburg thinks. And even in Moscow, not everybody matters equally. I think that the Kremlin's worried about those who are the upper economic class and those that have the most amount of ability to create change in the population. The oligarchical class is also very important. And in both cases, I think that they're not very happy with this war. And there's a lot of signs that this is going to be just one more thing that pushes them to want to see it end.
Let's talk about that for a minute. The oligarchs, the upper class, the people that actually do matter and are worth a damn as far as Putin is concerned. How about let's talk about the sanctions. As you know, there was a newer round of sanctions. There's going to be more sanctions. In your opinion, how are the sanctions working? Are they really squeezing the oligarchs, the elite class, to the point where it's going to start to matter to them, that they are going to start to hurt and maybe take some kind of action?
So I think it's going to be a while till we see some sort of big change there. And if we did see a big change, the oligarchs one would almost never say anything publicly. It's highly unusual what Deripaska chose to do. I think what's more likely, just as a general rule of Russian history, if you look back at the Boyars with the Tsar or anything else like this, or the Politburo of the Soviet Union, there has always been sort of this upper elite that's surrounding the leader of the country. And those do have an ability to inflect change. And that inflection of change could be several different ways. I think that the most likely one, if it ever came to it, is that somebody could try to overthrow the government of Russia, and it would probably come from that class. Once they'd made a deal with, let's just imagine, some disgruntled generals or some people from the intelligence service who are disgruntled. And that could happen for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's not going to be for sympathy for the Ukrainians, of course, but I cite you a recent example is Prigozhin. Who would expect that to happen? But if Prigozhin, he was aligned with some oligarchs, it appears. But if he had been aligned with more, or if they'd really started to get behind this, or the military units that agreed to work with him that seems backed out at the last minute had gone along, the Putin government could have been overthrown. When we look at what's happening today, I think that there's a very good chance that Putin is thinking about this daily, and that he does wonder what happens if these people all of a sudden decide, it's too much of him. It's time for a change. Because keep in mind, even if I am an oligarch and I love Putin, and I think he's great, and I've made all my money thanks to him, I'm cognizant of the fact that he's, 72 years old. He's not getting younger. He's going to die eventually. And those factions within the oligarchy all hate each other. They don't get along. There's constant conflict. And actually, one of the things that's allowed Putin to stay in power is just because he's sort of the linchpin. I mean, he's what balances them all out from, killing each other off and having mob warfare as they did in the 90s. And so I think that what would happen eventually is that if I realize I'm going to be on the losing side of a transition, that is, Patrushev or whoever is going to come to power after Putin, and he hates me, you can be sure that the guy that comes after Putin is going to liquidate the people that he hates to get rid of his potential threats, and he's going to take all their assets. So if you want to control your fate and to take control of the moment, it'd be wise to be the guy who gets rid of Putin yourself, which thereby would allow you to drive the future that Russia has. So you're not left to the whims of whoever comes after Putin. To just sit around and say, well, we'll just see who comes after Putin would be completely unwise and non-strategic. So I think that Putin really is playing with very dangerous people. And he's done it successfully so far, but now he's introduced a huge degree of instability that I don't think he had counted on. But more than that, I think that the sanctions, going back to your initial question, no, the oligarchs probably don't feel it in the way that we would hope that they would feel, except for those who have had their assets frozen in the West. But I think that there is something important that's happened in the recent sanctions, which is the implementation of secondary sanctions. For instance, banks in China that accept Russian money that's sanctioned will also be sanctioned. Now, that does actually have an impact because those banks, 80% of transactions now with yuan, the Chinese currency, are being denied by the Chinese banks. 80%. And the reason is because they're concerned about doing business with the Russians. They don't want to lose their ability to trade with the United States and Europe because they chose to do some, sort of questionable transactions with the Russians. So I think that, yes, the sanctions are having an impact, and I hope they're only strengthened further.
Well, getting back to what you just said about who actually affects or who could possibly overthrow Putin and who he listens to, the oligarchs, but certainly the military and the intelligence services. And right now, the military and the intelligence services are reeling. They're not doing too well. And he's not allowing them to replenish their forces because he is not calling for a mass mobilization for political reasons. And just my opinion, the time is ripe to just keep pushing to allow Ukraine, give Ukraine the ability to push even further and harder against Russia's military right now. They're on their heels. And like you said, he doesn't have the ability to go any further right now. They're actually surrendering as, in this incursion right now. And it just really upsets me that we are still, when I say we, the West, are still holding back on giving Ukraine what they need to push this over the top, to win. I was just reading something. Well, it's nothing new, but last month, Germany, after, then they've done a lot. I'm not going to try to criticize Germany too much today. They've done a lot. But after all this bluster and promoting how they're going to support Ukraine even more in the future, give them money and more arms, then what did they do last month? They slashed their defense budget in half. Due to, of course, political reasons. That made me pretty upset. They still don't get it. I mean, they get it, but they are just, and I've used this word before, I'm sorry, they're cowards. They've got, in Germany in particular, they have too many business interests in Russia. The leaders in Germany, not the German people so much. And this to me is still incredible after 2.5 years, the third year of the war. And from what they've seen, they're still not going to up their game and play these stupid political games. I could go off, but what do you think about that? The fact that Germany did slash their budget by half and go back on all their promises over the last couple of years.
Yeah, of course, it's very unfortunate. I mean, I'm not completely surprised by it. But the fact is that, Ukraine is totally reliant on foreign support. And ultimately, I think that those countries, especially Germany, it's been very short-sighted to not appreciate that. I mean, Germany is seeking to be the leader of Europe or continue being a leader of Europe. And one of the conditions for that, I think, is going to be the country that helps win the war in Ukraine. Because if it's not won, conflict will come to Europe eventually, and things will be much, much more expensive for not just the Germans, but everybody in Europe. So it would be much more strategically wise to help defeat the Russian threat at this initial stage before it's reached a NATO country.
Well, I agree. And, right now, again, Russia's on its heels, but Russia is not defeated. They are far from defeated. As you know, they have very large resources. And if Ukraine is only allowed to keep nibbling and nibbling away, even with incursions like this, Russia, if given the time, they will rearm, they will resupply, they will train, and they will grow, and they will have another bigger offensive if it continues like this, which leads me into my next point. It's the good old F-16s. F-16s have finally arrived in Ukraine. I understand that, and people are understandably happy. But I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, they got 4. If I'm not mistaken, maybe there's 6, but 4, 2 of which I think are going to be housed or based in Poland, so they're not destroyed on the ground. 4 F-16s are not going to do anything. They're not certainly going to win the war, and they're not even going to be able to protect Ukrainian airspace. Thoughts on this whole F-16 debacle, and what do you hear about what's the future status of getting more F-16s and train Ukrainian pilots in the war?
So as far as F-16s go, I think that there will be more of them coming. I mean, it is tragic that it's been more than 2 years now of talking about this and still come to this. Training Ukrainian pilots is an issue. I mean, it is very complicated to be an F-16 pilot, and it's because it's not simply flying the airplane; it's entire strategy behind it. I mean, the Soviet style of aviation was that from the ground they're telling you what to do. You know, turn 5 degrees this direction, turn this direction, do this. Fire this missile. And versus F-16, the squadron leader is going to be the guy telling everyone else in the group what they should be doing. So it's, learning the whole strategy of how you are supposed to operate in that capacity. That being said, as everyone has observed 2 years ago when that argument was being made, is that, well, we could just contract people. I mean, there's tons and tons of former F-16 pilots that are just getting out of the military that could take a job. And so it would be a very quick fix. But yeah, unfortunately, it seems it's the White House that has been the one really putting the brakes at getting F-16s for Ukraine, as they did earlier with long-range weapons, whether it was the ATACMS or the HIMARS. It was just always, always, always this struggle to get the White House to okay it out of this wholly irrational fear of escalation, which they said would lead to nuclear warfare, which is just it's beyond stupid. It's just absolutely absurd. And shows a total lack of understanding of Russia. But neither here nor there. I mean, and the evidence for that, for my argument, is that everything that they have said would be an escalation has already been done. I mean, Ukraine has F-16s, nothing happened. Ukraine has ATACMS, nothing happened. Has HIMARS, nothing happened. Is incurred into Russia, nothing happened. Apparently is using Stryker, American military vehicles, in Russia, nothing happened. Russia's not going to nuke Washington or New York because we allowed the Ukrainians to win. The consequences of Putin invading Ukraine is that Ukraine gets the support from the United States that it promised to give, which is to support Ukraine and to give it what's necessary. So I don't see any problem with this. And I think it's absolutely the lost world of DC thinkers that, talk about things, they read books about things, read articles about things. But I think when you talk to the vast majority of military folks, they will not come to the same conclusion that this is a huge threat to the United States if we arm Ukraine. Quite the opposite. They would probably argue that we should arm Ukraine and allow Ukraine to win.
Well, I mean, you're right. It's training pilots for an F-16 to fly an F-16, especially in combat, is no easy feat. And, they can't train them as they were trained in Soviet Union tactics. Not only that, Jason, but as you know, it's not just the pilots. You need the maintenance. You need the ground crews. You need the people that service these aircraft. So it's a very long cycle. And what really gets me about this is not only did it take so long to make the decision, but when they allegedly made the decision in the United States to train Ukrainian pilots on F-16s, they didn't allocate the budget. And so there were only very, very few slots, I think 6 in total, to train pilots in the F-16s. Again, that's nothing. It takes anywhere from, I don't know, 8 to 12 or 16 months to totally train a pilot, depending on to what degree. And 6 pilots, that's ridiculous. So that upsets me. And you're right. Why didn't they use pilots that were already trained from not only the United States, which has a lot of retired or former F-16 pilots, but from all of the NATO countries? It makes no sense. And I'll say this, and I've said it before, Jake Sullivan is no friend to, he's not that he's not a friend to Ukraine, but he is the driving force between all the cowardice, all of the hesitancy in the Biden administration. And I don't know what the deal is with that. If that's just the way he feels, if there's something going on beyond that, probably not. But he is the main driving force in the massive hesitancy between not just the F-16s, everything you mentioned, from the ATACMS to the HIMARS to the tanks to the F-16s. It's just a disgrace. And I think until and unless the administration changes, not to a Republican administration, but the next Democratic administration, that's not going to change. He's still there. I'll put you on the spot. What do you think about Jake Sullivan? Is he the main problem here,
No,
or am I wrong?
no, I think he's the main problem. I mean, he was the advisor to Biden in 2014 when this all started. Biden was vice president. He was at that time against giving Ukraine javelins. Javelins are used for anti-tank. They're not offensive weapons. And he thought that would be an escalation. I don't know why it'd be an escalation to give them something to stop tanks. But, and it was his view at the time, oh, we can't allow that. And I think ultimately it's just hubris, it's arrogance. I mean, there's all the evidence so far is totally contradicted absolutely everything that Jake Sullivan has done. Now, keep in mind, Jake Sullivan is the one who I think was 2 days before October 7th said that the Middle East has never been so peaceful and is the fruits of their hard labor and everything was going great thanks to his strategy. And what happened? Quite the opposite. Israel got attacked, and then since then, already 10 months later, the Middle East is totally hot. I mean, anything could happen there, as you know, between all the different countries that are involved. So I think that Jake Sullivan has showed that he's very often wrong, but is unwilling to admit that. He's unwilling to examine further what needs to be done or what could be done better. It's just ultimately, end of the day, arrogance.
I don't want to get into right now the what may or may not happen in the American election. I do want to close on that, but I want to get your thoughts on where NATO is right now and the EU, Europe, in terms of Ukraine. Of obviously, where are they at in transitioning from an America-backed effort, from an Europe protected by America to, and I hate to say it, but pulling their own weight to finally realizing that they are responsible for their own defense, and in this case have a moral, if no other, responsibility in helping Ukraine. Where are they at in that transition and retooling, and I guess just in the political will? Are they going to be able to do this if America decides not to help after, say, January of next year?
They are working on plans for that, specifically in the case of Ukraine. They are working on a European plan should the United States discontinue its assistance for the country. And I think also the United States, though it does play a very important role, it's key to understand that it doesn't play the only role. I mean, it's not 80% of the equation. It was slightly more than half of the military support. It was a minority of the humanitarian support. This because the U.S. did stop sending aid for about half a year. The Europeans did start picking up slack. One of their biggest problems was simply capacity. They don't have nearly as many weapons as what they really need, and something that I think that a lot of people who look at European security have come to really appreciate is how much Europe really does need to take care of itself. If the United States tomorrow, for whatever reason, was unable to or unwilling to assist Europe with a crisis or military intervention, what would happen? Because they simply don't have enough weaponry and the supplies that I would have assumed they would have had. And so they need to, at this point, start to really pull themselves together and figure out what do they do to protect Europe in the case that Europe can only take care of itself.
Can they? I guess that's my question. I recently read another report on Germany, for example, because they are the largest economy. If war came tomorrow to Germany, they've got about 3 weeks supply of ammunition. This is disgraceful. Are they going to be able to retool their industry to get to the point where they can defend themselves, much less send the agreed upon support for Ukraine? I'm doubtful. What do you think?
I mean, I'm very concerned. I'm also doubtful. It's as I said, it's been very very surprising to me, quite enlightening actually, is how little the U.S. has of some things. I mean, when you think of our military-industrial complex, there's some things that we just seem to have tons and tons of, like F-16s, which we're not giving to Ukraine, which is inexplicable. We're retiring them all the time, which there's a lot of things actually that we also destroy. I mean, look at the artillery. Every year, the U.S. spends hundreds of millions of dollars destroying old artillery. We could donate it to Ukraine. I mean, if it's going towards expiration, it's going towards being destroyed, we can give it to Ukraine. It'll be used up within a couple of days. Don't worry about it. It's not going to, sit and rot somewhere. So there's a lot of things we could be doing. I mean,
Jason, have you ever visited? I hate to say this, but you just made me think of something very important. I think. Have you ever been to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base mothball fleet of aircraft in Tucson, Arizona?
No, I was thinking about it as I was describing this, but I've not been there. Yes,
I have many times. I used to live in Tucson.
oh,
It's unbelievable. I mean, I believe it's the largest mothball fleet of aircraft in the world, military aircraft. Jason, there are so many serviceable Military aircraft there. I'm thinking specifically of the A-10 Thunderbolt, which Air Force pilots love this, and the Air Force has been trying to get rid of it for 20 or 30 years as an example. But there are many, many serviceable aircraft there that within a very short period of time can be refurbished and have pilots retrained, or pilots that flew them when they're on active duty fly them or train other pilots to fly. We could have been doing this for the last 2.5 years. So that really ticks me off. Europe doesn't have as many, but they also have mothball fleets of not only aircraft, but of, as you know, armor and many, many other things. So it's just disgraceful that we are not sending that over to Ukraine. And you're right. At this point, in my opinion, it's not only disgraceful, it's dangerous that NATO and the United States haven't put their economies, their peacetime economies, on a wartime footing. We're in a war. I don't know how else to describe it. They don't seem to get that. And Europe especially is in a war, and maybe in a very hot war very, very soon. Their economies aren't on a wartime footing. They couldn't possibly supply anywhere near the ammunition or rifles or tanks or anything else if Russia decided just, to launch a little incursion over the border.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, it's as I said, it's one thing that surprised me the most is how inadequate the current supplies are. And once again, there are things that there's tons of apparently, like F-16s, and there's some things that there's actually shortages of, ATACMS, Patriot missiles, things that I would have imagined. I don't know why I would have imagined that, but I would have thought, there was enough strategy going into it, saying, well, we should have lots of those just in case. But apparently not. I mean, keep in mind, Zelensky was running around Europe just a few weeks ago trying to get 4 Patriot missiles systems. 4. I mean, it's not a huge number. 4, and it was really a challenge. It was really hard, and it shows you just how totally lacking our current supplies are.
And apparently lacking, our political will is still lacking. I haven't read anything, and I've asked many, many people. I haven't heard or read that we are now producing Patriot missiles or any of the or ATACMS or any of the needed munitions in great wartime numbers. Yes, we have upped the production in the United States. I know that, but nowhere near what we need. And the same thing in Europe. I keep saying this, and I know I sound like a broken record, but they just don't get it, and I guess they won't. I guess unless they see, T-90s rolling over the border in Eastern Germany or in some other country, they're just not going to accept the fact that they're in a war and that this is serious. It upsets me a great deal.
I agree with you. I mean, it is alarming, and I wonder to what degree that's caused, because there's all the evidence that they should be alarmed, that they should be concerned. But I wonder to what degree that this is caused by simple political populism, where they choose to expend money and resources on things that will gain votes in the next election, even if that means ignoring national security concerns. Because that's hypothetical. I mean, it seems likely there might be a conflict, but that's not something that people feel every day. Every day they feel potholes. And so fixing those potholes will take the priority. And that's just a small example. I mean, there's a ton of social expenditures, as you know, especially in Europe. And so there are ways that they could choose to redirect funds in order to have a better prepared military situation, but they've elected to not do so.
Well, and that's why leaders are supposed to be leaders. They don't have to worry about, or they shouldn't worry about the fact that the average citizen doesn't worry about that. That's their job to worry about that. But in my opinion, and I've said this many times before, it's a combination of what you said. The political will isn't there because the people don't want it, and so they want to divert resources to other things like filling potholes and building more housing and building more roads, all of which are admirable in peacetime. And that's what they're doing. But I also think it's a matter of cowardice. It is. And of financial business connections in Moscow. In Germany, it's no secret that many of the current and former leaders have and had very strong business interests in Russia. And that's unbelievable that that still exists. And I believe it's the fact or a reason why Germany hasn't done more. And you've said this in this interview, Germany is the leader, whether they want to be or not, of Europe, both financially and to a degree militarily. The rest of NATO looks to them. Now they don't, because America is kind of bowing out. They look to Germany. And if Germany says, well, we don't have to do anything right now, well, the rest of NATO is not going to do anything either, except for the Baltics and Poland, because they do know the real issue. They know they're going to be on the front lines if nobody does anything. But the rest of Europe looks to Germany, and Germany says, relax, nothing to see here.
That's right. I agree with you totally. But unfortunately, I don't know what's going to take to wake them up from this.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if the U.S. does move in the direction of not being able to finance this or to support this effort in Ukraine much longer after January, I think that there's going to be a lot more pressure on the Germans to come up with some solutions quickly.
Well, let me round this out today because it's something we have to talk about. We obviously have an election coming up in the next little over 3 months. Uh, Things have changed drastically here. Just from 3 or so weeks ago, when Joe Biden was the candidate, the Democratic candidate, and everybody, including myself, thought that the Democrats were going to lose. We were going to get a second Trump administration, and basically our democracy would be at an end. That still may happen, but right now Kamala Harris is has wiped out most of the lead in the polls, at least that Trump had. And I have to say, as someone that's living here, the mood has changed 180 degrees. There is actually a lot of optimism right now in this country among people who don't want Trump back, that the Democrats have an excellent chance of winning the election. In fact, all the momentum right now is with the Democrats. I know you're not a politician, but you are a political analyst, and I know you follow this a lot. What are your thoughts on that? What do you see in the mood right now in America, and what might you project for November and beyond?
Well, I think that, I mean, at this point, I think that I agree with your analysis is that I think Trump 3 weeks ago, when it was still Joe Biden, I would assume that Trump would win. I mean, Joe Biden's numbers were just terrible. I mean, Joe Biden's popularity was the lowest out of any president since polling had begun in 1947 in the U.S. And it's funny is that the second least popular president was Trump, but he was still slightly more popular, which means when you're between the two of them, he's more likely to win. At this point, out of the 7 battleground states, it's gotten much closer, and all of them actually Harris is actually winning in some of them at this point. And we see the trend. She had a huge number of people who didn't really know who she was, which gives her a ceiling that can expand. I mean, Donald Trump's got a very low ceiling. That is, people either love him or hate him. There's no real middle ground of people go, I'm not really sure what I think about the guy. So it's very hard for him to gain new voters. The vice president, on the other hand, is somebody who most people probably didn't have a great opinion of, and polling would indicate that. But still, there's 15% of people who said they weren't really sure who she was. So if you had pressed people further and said, name one thing that she does or did as vice president, I would bet a very significant number, another 15, 20%, probably had no idea. And so this are all people that she can right now persuade to vote for her. This, given the fact that also Donald Trump, I think, made a horrifically bad decision as vice president, not because I personally dislike him, which I do, but because it's simply he doesn't expand the base whatsoever. He is a MAGA Republican. He was one of the lowest vote getters in Ohio, his state, as far as it goes for statewide office holders. He just performed badly. He was not popular. And it was just a huge miscalculation, I think, to have chosen him. Now,
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I think that Harris ultimately, her choice for vice president wasn't somebody that I would have perhaps thought she would choose. But I think that he is somebody who's going to be far more likable to average Americans than is J.D. Vance.
Well, you mentioned J.D. Vance, and I know you're a political consultant. You're certainly not a fashion consultant. But what do you think of his eyeliner? Just kidding. I don't want you to get into that. I think it's rather interesting, but that's.
Yeah, I don't know why he does that. That's really strange.
I do, but I won't discuss it on air. What do you think, Jason, though, as far as, and I'll go out on a limb. I think she's going to win. I know that's crazy, but I've been so depressed the last year or so with the inevitability of a Trump win before Biden dropped out that I have to say that I feel better than I felt in a very long time. And right now, all indications are that the Democrats and Harris's and Waltz's positive rating and their ratings period are just going to keep going up. I mean, the mood in this country is unbelievable right now. It really is. But if they do win in November and assume office in January, do you see any drastic changes to the support for Ukraine, or do you see it pretty much staying as it is? Will they take any more chances? I would hope Jake Sullivan's replaced, or what do you think about that whole transition in terms of U.S. support for Ukraine?
So I think first, Jake Sullivan probably would be replaced because he's simply not her security advisor. She has her own people. And I think, though, as a whole, a lot of people who support Ukraine might hope that it's actually the vice president who might deal with Ukraine. Harris has never been really passionate about international relations. That's not her topic. It's much more domestic, inward-looking things, social policy in the U.S., for instance, that I think she's much more well known for. And she's expressed as vice president a lot more opinions about those issues than she has about foreign affairs. Obviously, she supports Ukraine, but it's not been something that has been a big driver for her, I would say. That's why there is a hope that it'll be the vice president. The vice president is somebody who he's actually spoken to Zelensky before. He is very supportive of Ukraine, and I think he's much more hawkish than a lot of people who are in the current administration. And so I think that there is hope that if Harris were to win, that she would allow the vice president to really play a role in that. And this could be something that would be a game changer for Ukraine. But either way, I think there's a secondary factor, which is the fact that whoever wins the presidency has a down ballot effect as well. I mean, that, if a Republican wins the White House, it affects the House races and the Senate races. Now, if the Democrats were to win at the White House level, it means that there's a better chance that the House, Senate starts to tilt more in the direction of Democrats, one way or another. But why that's important, I think, is just simply to get legislation passed for Ukraine will not be as challenging. I'm not going to predict, which way the House or Senate are going to flip, but I will say that having more Democrats there is probably going to increase the probability that Ukraine aid could continue being pushed through.
Well, I agree. Even if Harris Walz wins the White House and the Republicans, for whatever reason, hold on to the House and win the Senate, I see things actually getting worse for Ukraine because legislation is not going to pass. They're going to have the ability to possibly even override a veto, but at least they're not going to go down easily for Ukrainian aid. So I think you're right. The down ballot is extremely important. So in order for Ukraine to get or continue the support they're getting now and to have it increase, the Democrats not only have to win the White House, but they have to at least hold on to the House, and preferably, or not hold on to the House, hold on to the Senate, and preferably take over the House as well. But we shall see. One other thing I actually want to bring up, actually, as maybe the final question for today. I received some questions and thoughts about the situation in the UK, in Great Britain, about the civil unrest that's going on right now, which is not unsubstantial. And some people, and to me, it actually reminds me of the MAGA situation here in the United States. There is a lot of Russian disinformation, as you know, going on in Great Britain, and I believe it's the fuel to the fire of why this is happening right now. But the Brits, at least a lot of them, don't realize that, and if they do, they don't care. So what are your thoughts about that? The number one, the civil unrest in the UK, where's it going to go? And do you believe, as I do, that a lot of it is because of propaganda, disinformation by Russian media Russians on social media in the UK?
Yeah, undoubtedly, Russia does play a role in this. I mean, that's been, I think, already formally acknowledged that Russia is playing a role in the situation in the UK. But Russia as a whole, I think it's important to understand is that they see conflict in societies, I mean, Western societies, and they don't really take sides as much as people think. They will finance at the same time an extremely conservative organization, extremely leftist organization, because they're not really interested in the result. They're interested in seeing people fight. And so that's why, they will at one time finance a minority rights organization, say, and then finance some sort of right-wing, a nativist organization, because ultimately they don't really care who wins. They care that those two start fighting with each other.
Chaos.
And Russia has been doing that for the entire length of the Cold War. And that is not something new. That's a standard Russian policy for many, many years. And they actually, if you look back at what sort of propaganda they financed in other countries, yeah, they will be supporting any sort of radical position possible, just because they hope that it creates more tensions in society. And keep in mind, there's tensions in your own society. You're going to be a lot less outward looking at what's going on in Ukraine, for instance, as it gives them a free hand to continue doing whatever lawlessness they wish to commit.
Well, which is why it fits so perfectly into the playbook of MAGA. MAGA, or at least Trump's playbook, is chaos. He doesn't care what happens. He just wants chaos. That's what he's all about. And that's what's happening in the UK right now. Like you, and I agree with you. The Russians don't care. As long as they divide society, that's their goal. And they are. Right now, they've had some of the most horrible riots in recent history, or recent years, rather, in UK. And I guess it just bothers me. Now, I don't care where it is, in America, UK, Africa, Europe. When Russia is so obviously at the core of this, or at least they're pouring fuel on the fire, and the people in those countries don't care. They don't care. They believe what's on the social media, or they don't want to really listen, and they go out and riot in the streets, knowing that a foreign actor is playing them like a puppet. It just really pisses me off, I guess. But what are you going to do about it? That's the way of the world.
No, it's something that needs to be looked into. The fact is that Russia is a malign actor that has a poisonous effect on many countries, many societies. And I mean, we could at some other point discuss the levels of it, but just trust me, there's incredible lengths that they've gone through in across multiple societies, promoting all sorts and all forms of radicalism, and things that will just generally ignite some sort of discontent, that which will lead to maybe an outward show of it, such as in rioting.
And I'll close on this. And the reason it gets me upset is because I clearly remember interviews after the 2016 election where reporters went to people who admitted they had voted for Donald Trump, and showed them official reports from American intelligence agencies stating that many of the stories that these MAGA supporters had read online, many of the people they had conversed with for the last year online supporting Trump were in fact Russian bots, that they weren't even Americans. When these Trump supporters were confronted with that and actually got to read the quotes and the official word from the government, they said they don't care. They literally don't care. Not even that they don't believe it at that point. They don't care. They love Trump, and they don't care if Russia convinced them to vote for him. That bothers me a lot, and I believe that's at the heart of our problem, at least here in the United States. And I'll leave it at that, because that's another show. Jason, thank you so much for joining me again on the No Delusion Zone. Take care, stay safe, and let's do it again soon.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this edition of the No Delusion Zone. And remember, anyone can have their own delusions, but they can't have their own facts. Take care, stay safe, and stay sane.